Welcome back to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. Want to get right over to another big interview this morning. Steve Leisman joins us with a very special guest. Steve.
Good morning, Andrew. Yes, we're joined by Dallas Fed President Robert Kaplan. President Kaplan, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to get right to, there's just a ton of news out there, but the first thing I want to ask you about is the issue of the vaccine. How critical is the vaccine to the outlook? How closely do you follow it? And I think the most important part of this question is, how does it look like the U.S. is doing relative to your expectations?
The vaccine is critical, and getting the population vaccinated and making sure we can do that rapidly is critical. And when you think that there are various variants of the virus around the world, some of them may be here, may grow here, I think it makes the urgency of getting people vaccinated that much greater. And that process is critical to seeing the economy recover, better mobility engagement, getting schools reopened in person. It's central to everything we're seeing in the economy.
So what's your assessment then of how it's going? I'm assuming that a lot of your outlook, you said yesterday that you thought we were headed towards 5% GDP. I'm assuming a lot of that outlook is relative to the vaccine getting out there and distributed. Is it going according to your forecast?
I think with the plans that have been announced, with the administration's plan of at least 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days, if that were to occur, which we're hopeful it will, and we maybe can do better, mobility engagement will still be sluggish, we think, up until June. And the next few months, certainly in the economy, are going to be sluggish. But I think you're going to start to see then, once we get to June and beyond, better mobility, better engagement by consumers, a lot of small businesses doing better, and everything will flow from that. But it's critical. So how are we doing? I know there have been some fits and starts, but I'm very hopeful that we'll make more progress. And cities and states do need money to execute this program, and it's money for logistics, but they need money for staff to administer the vaccines, and we're hearing that throughout our district.
You talk about increasing mobility in June, the economy perhaps returning to normal. How does Federal Reserve policy react to that? You're buying an awful lot of securities, $120 billion a month of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. You're at zero interest rates. As the economy returns to normal, does Fed policy need to return to normal?
I would say there'll be time to have that discussion down the road, and you've heard me say before that once we've weathered the pandemic and we've moved beyond it, which we're not out of the woods by a long shot yet, and we're making substantial progress on our goals, I think there'll be time to have that discussion. I think we'll be healthier to wean off these extraordinary measures. But right now, we're in the teeth of this pandemic, and so I think we should be aggressive. And I'll probably avoid talking about timing, and I want to avoid being rigid or predetermined about when we're going to move beyond this pandemic. Right now, we're in the middle of it.
You've long talked, President Kaplan, about your concerns about the effect of monetary policy on financial markets. It's hard not to look at some of the things that are going on right now, from GameStops to Reddit-fueled short squeezes, and think that maybe there aren't some excesses going on. To what extent do you see that linked to monetary policy?
So I don't see anything right now systemic. I'm watching this very, very carefully. I'm looking at financial stability questions in the non-bank financial markets, funding risk. I think part of what you're seeing, I think there's a lot of factors in the current situation, but one of them, yes, is there's a substantial amount of liquidity, and we're seeing that at play. I still think we need to be doing what we're doing right now in the teeth of the pandemic. But again, I think as we move beyond it, it'll be healthier to start limiting this liquidity and normalizing monetary policy down the road. The issue is, I'm going to avoid talking about when that might be. But yes, some of the current situation, you're seeing one of the factors is there's a lot of liquidity, and some of that relates to Fed purchases of $80 billion of treasuries and $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities every month. I think it's wise for us to acknowledge that.
The other side of the liquidity from the Federal Reserve is concerns about inflation. I want to ask you broadly about whether or not that's something you see coming down the road, but more specifically, being the work that I know the Dallas Fed does about oil prices, I've been surprised that given the lack of demand right now for oil, the price has held up quite so well. Is that something you expect to perhaps go up a lot more when the economy returns to normal?
Yeah, we do. We expect the global oil and gas markets will get into rough balance probably sometime in early 2022. You'll see production this year we're in probably flattish, but as the year goes on, there's no doubt that driving will increase as long as all goes well with the vaccine and with the virus. Mobility will increase, driving will increase, consumption will increase. In terms of inflation, it wouldn't surprise me to see during this year some inflation spikes in certain items. We see shortages of things like semiconductors, metals, wood products, packaging products. I think a lot of that will be transitory. I think the longer term issue is going to be as the cyclical forces of inflation build, how much are they offset by technology-enabled disruption, globalization? I think the jury's out on how those forces will play out.
President Kaplan, I've got two more questions for you, if you don't mind. First, you have a choice. You got a $600 billion package from the Republicans. You got a $1.9 trillion package from President Biden. Pick one.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer, but thank you for offering. I'll stay away from that debate completely, but I would comment. Here's what I'm hearing in my district, which I'll give insight from that point of view. It's critical that we have money to do vaccinations and testing. It's critical that people are out of work, have continued relief beyond March. It's critical we have enough money to reopen schools. And one of the big issues in this pandemic is women with children have disproportionately left the workforce. So getting schools reopened in person and having money for that and money for childcare is going to be critical to getting that group back into the workforce. We need it if we're going to grow faster.
Thank you for that, President Kaplan. One more question. The 10-year yield now at 111, which is one of the highest levels we've seen on the one hand. On the other hand, be still my beating heart that it's only still 111. Jeff Gundlach on our air a few weeks ago talked about the idea that perhaps the Fed is gearing its concern about the 10-year towards when it becomes positive in a real basis, that the 10-year yield remains on an inflation-adjusted basis negative. Is that a point at which you might become concerned and think that there's it's the time to come in and perhaps cap that growth, or is it not a concern of yours at all?
I think if we go through the year and we're successful in combating the virus and we get higher growth, you're going to see the 10-year and the curve back up. In other words, rates will be higher. I would expect that. And you've heard me say before, I'd be reticent at this point, based on what I'm seeing, for us to take action and do things that might distort those market signals. I think it should be expected and maybe healthy to see that curve back up as we recover. Back in January of 2020, the 10-year was 175 to 2%. I don't know where we'll head here, but I would expect it'll be a healthy sign for yields to back up as we recover, and I'm probably expecting that.
President Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good to talk to you, Steve.